Where is everyone?
Attention everybody, thank you very much for coming. It's great to see such a big turnout. If everyone could please take their seat. Pavel, the president of RUSA, is about to come up, say a few words, introduce the debate team, and then we'll begin our debate. So if everyone could please just grab some food, take a seat right now, thank you, and Pavel will be coming up in a minute.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming to the RUSA meeting. So first off, I'd like to ask everyone to grab your food, take a seat. So please be respectful to all the debaters and all the people presenting and speaking. It's really hard, to speak publicly and just polite. So without further ado, I'd like to present Mr. Troy Clayton, coach of the Rutgers debate unit, nationally ranked team and one of the best in the country. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and I'd like to thank everyone at RUSA for inviting us here and having this event and getting the food and inviting everyone here. I think it's really great that so many of you have turned out to support this debate and support the idea of discourse. We're here to discuss the issue of whether the invitation to make Condoleezza Rice the 2014 Rutgers Commencement speaker should be rescinded or upheld. And we are here in part to fulfill the words of President Robert Barchi. After the Faculty Council made a declaration that the invitation should be rescinded, he sent an email to all staff 20 days ago, all staff and students, and he said, among other things, quote, "My hope is that we can use these seemingly controversial moments to reaffirm our commitment to open and civil discourse. Indeed, they provide strong evidence of a healthy and engaged university community. I will continue to work with you to guarantee the university remains a space where ideas can be considered, discussed, and debated, a space that embraces and defends civil discourse, free speech, and academic freedom." So we are here to embrace that mandate, to consider, to discuss, and to debate controversial issues. And it is essential that when we disagree, especially vehemently, we are able to come together in a venue such as this to have civil discourse about our disagreements and to take the time not only to speak our mind, but to listen to others. I know perhaps of no better format for this experience than a formal public debate. So in a moment, you will hear from these 6 distinguished members of the Rutgers University Debate Union, which is currently the 6th ranked debate team in the country. Princeton, for reference, is 12th. So I have coached the debate union here for the last 5 years, and they've worked tirelessly and impressively to improve their skills and take on some of the most difficult and pressing issues of our time with relevance to university students, people all around the state, the country, and the globe. And they have continually surpassed my expectations. And tonight they will engage in one of these key questions facing our administration, faculty, staff, and students. And I look forward to it very much. So a few words about the format of the debate that you're going to see here tonight. We practice something called parliamentary debate, which is modeled off of the British Parliament, and the positions are called the government team and the opposition team. So the government team will stand in support of the resolution, advocating that the invitation should indeed be rescinded, and the opposition team will oppose that motion. They will speak in turn, but government has the privilege of speaking first and last because they hold the burden of proof. So you will hear both first and last from the speaker, and there will be back-to-back speeches in the middle from the opposition. So each team will have 3 speeches, they will have equal time, and I will be moderating and keeping time. Many debate formats have a specific question and answer period, but in our format, that is more on the fly. So we have what we call points of information, where individuals rise to indicate that they want to ask a question. The speaker does not have to take a question at any given time, but it's expected that they take one in each of the first 4 speeches. And it looks kind of funny. It comes from our parliamentary roots, where people will make a motion something like this, which comes from the old days when they had wigs in Parliament, and if they would rise up out of their chairs so quickly that if they didn't cover their wigs, they would reveal that they were in fact bald, and the wig would fly off, and it would be embarrassing and override their question. So you will see that in practice tonight. So that's a bit about the format. Now allow me, please, to introduce the 6 speakers who will be representing both sides of the resolution in tonight's debate. So representing the government, we have R.B. Laveshi as the Prime Minister. He is a fourth-year majoring in political science. R.B. represented Rutgers at Nationals 2 years ago and is on the verge of qualifying for Nationals again this year. And he and his partner are in the top 40 national rankings for individual partnerships of 2 people. We have several teams in that top 40. Rachel Moon is the member of government. She is a junior majoring in planning and public policy and is the former public relations chair of the debate union. And she is one of 5 of our debaters currently fully qualified for the national championships. Sean Leonard is the government whip. He's a sophomore majoring in political science and is the current vice president of the debate union. He is currently the 13th ranked individual speaker in the country and is qualified for nationals for the 2nd year in a row. Representing the opposition, Daimler Ved Lemurray is the leader of opposition. He is a senior majoring in biological sciences and has been debating for the debate union since 2010 and has won several awards in the last 3 years and is one of many debaters on the team headed for medical school. Deepta Janardhan is the member of opposition. She's a senior majoring in economics and political science and is a former novice mentor of the debate union, and she and her partner are also in the top 40 of the national rankings for individual partnerships. And finally, Alex Jubb is the opposition whip. She is a senior majoring in planning and public policy and is the former alumni coordinator of the debate union, and she and her partner finished in the top 25 at the national championships last year. So I must emphasize that the views that will be expressed by these 6 individuals tonight do not necessarily represent their own personal viewpoints. So one of the great things about debate as a format and as an activity is that it trains us to understand both sides of any given question in any given debate, as hopefully you will tonight. So without further ado, I call this House to order and invite the Right Honorable Prime Minister, R.B. Laveshi, to open the round on the resolution that Rutgers should disinvite Condoleezza Rice as this year's commencement speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an incredible honor to be here debating this heavily contested issue before you all. Today, we on the government side will defend rescinding the commencement invitation towards Condoleezza Rice. Rutgers University is not only a state school, it is a representation of the student body as a whole. We don't just stand as a name, but rather as a collective group of ideals that we hold dear. In our modern society, there are things that we must oppose. These are things that stand outside of the realm of political issues. We don't take stances against taxes or policies or divide lines between Democratic and Republican, yet there are a number of things that are inherently bad, regardless of what stances you hold. Torture, war crime, and the restriction of information does not suddenly become acceptable if you believe in liberal or conservative values. These are violations of human rights and violations of the functioning of a democracy. Acceptance of these notions becomes a collective action problem, with people arguing that they should not stand against them because others do not. Someone has to be the first to break that mold, to stand against objective injustice and set the precedent that these things will not be tolerated. That stand starts today. The Iraq Body Count Project estimates the total number of deaths from direct combat in the Iraq War at 115,000, including thousands of Americans. Condoleezza Rice personally continued to push the narrative that weapons of mass destruction were being developed in Iraq. She appeared on CNN with the controversial statement that the smoking gun should not be a mushroom cloud and pushed the war narrative through multifaceted testimony which depicted Iraq as a growing and powerful threat in the Middle East. Now, we know that Iraq's nuclear program had been dead for a decade, ladies and gentlemen, and that its capacity to develop said weapons was constantly dwindling ever since. The American people might find it difficult to swallow that our intelligence agencies had not scratched the surface of Saddam's inner circle ever since our major military conflict in 1990. Fortunately, we don't have to. Ultimately, we understand that in 2002, Dr. Rice was privy to CIA intelligence, which denied the existence of a WMD program within Iraq. CIA Director George Tenet personally approached President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and Dr. Rice, the National Security Advisor at the time, with evidence coming explicitly from Saddam's inner circle, Say what you want about the Central Intelligence Agency, but it does its job. Sadly, intelligence is only as useful as long as it's put to good use. When it is ignored, that is hindering information, that is creating a deviation from democracy, and that is lying to the American populace. In March 19, 2003, we invaded Iraq with evidence which directly contradicted our public claims. Dr. Rice was complicit in the actions of an administration which has essentially destroyed a nation and killed thousands of individuals. She played on the fears of Americans by portraying a distant Middle Eastern nation as a growing and malicious threat. When we honor individuals, we consider them to be heroes. When we honor individuals, we think of those actions, and we think of what actions should be emulated and encouraged. Ask yourselves right now, does this woman deserve to be considered a hero? This woman is not a paragon of truth. She lied to Americans. This woman is not a paragon of mediation. She chose war over continued negotiation with the Iraqi government. This woman is not a paragon of cooperation, as her administration ignored the United Nations when declaring war. At best, Dr. Rice is an individual who treated the lives of Americans and Iraqis as things to be thrown away in a wanton manner, all the while having the power to put an end to it, having the power to change things by using her voice. Instead, she chose to do nothing, which means at worst, she is a war criminal. Dr. Rice was also directly complicit in the condoning of waterboarding as an interrogation technique. You can call it enhanced interrogation, but the Geneva Convention clearly considers it torture. The international community considers it torture, and the United Nations considers it torture. Waterboarding, which is a merciless technique which causes constant suffering and long-term psychological damage to individuals, was allowed to continue under this administration because of this woman's support. Now, I ask you for a minute to imagine Condoleezza waterboarding some poor victim, because in all honesty, condoning waterboarding and enacting it are not at all different. According to a Daily Targum editorial, a commencement speaker is meant to be someone who has made some extraordinary and meaningful accomplishments in their lives to inspire a generation of college graduates. Rice probably has a lot of advice on perseverance, dedication, and hard work that she can offer to this year's graduating class. But what she chose to do with those qualities is certainly questionable to us. We on the government side stand with this statement. The impact of Dr. Rice as a commencement speaker is in itself also a contentious issue and undermines the overall environment of commencement. Her actions in the past will loom over like a specter over the graduates she speaks to. For too many individuals, her words will fall on deaf ears, either because they consider her a despicable individual or because they have chosen to walk out, imitating protests in Boston College during the commencement in 2006. Normally, during commencement, the speaker is considered a moral paragon by the entire audience, not half of it. Commencement is supposed to be a day that celebrates the hard work and accomplishment of Rutgers graduates. It is supposed to be about them and focus on them. Instead, it will be focused on controversy, walkouts, and political divisiveness. It will cease to be about the graduates and their accomplishments and turn to Condoleezza's past. When considering how we have come to this situation, we need an understanding of how Dr. Rice was selected to be the commencement speaker. Normally, commencement speakers are nominated by faculty members. This year, the Rutgers faculty was told that their nominations were unnecessary and that a speaker had been chosen. While Dr. Rice's selection has been championed as a demonstration of discourse in action, it is surprisingly ironic that she was selected as the commencement speaker solely by the Board of Governors. There was no internal debate, and when faculty members asked to explain their stance to the board on the next meeting, they were denied and alerted to their absence in a previous board meeting they had never been made aware of. Currently, 350 faculty members have signed a petition opposing the board's decision. This is not the type of divide we want in a university environment. In an ideal world, this choice would be left up to the collective faculty, board, and student body. There is a bitter irony behind the fact that President Barkey has proclaimed that the decision is set in stone. After all, discourse is only meaningful when we have the power to enact change, when we can actually use that discourse to change the status quo. Here, we take a moral stance. Today we have the opportunity to proclaim that Rutgers students proudly stand shoulder to shoulder with our faculty in opposition of this decision. Because of this, we happily propose this resolution.
Hear, hear.
I thank the Speaker for his case and now invite the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Daimler Vadla Murray, to open the House for the opposition side.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. It's a tremendous honor to be debating for the university and the students on a topic of such importance, not only to our community, but the nation at large. The debate we should be having today is not about the policies enacted by Dr. Rice by the administration that she was a part of, but rather her accomplishments in the world and in American political history. We should view this as an opportunity to celebrate the achievements of our graduates by having such a highly accomplished woman speak at commencement. The first argument we're going to be presenting on our side is why Dr. Rice is deserving of this honor. Regardless of if you're a Democrat or a Republican, as President Barchi said, one cannot dispute the fact that Dr. Rice is one of the most influential, intellectual, and political figures of the last 50 years. And the students who have devoted 4 years to this institution deserve to hear her speak. Dr. Rice, born in Alabama in 1954, growing up through the civil rights movement, has faced her share of hardships in her life. She's seen the hardships of the civil rights movement and has faced many challenges and has risen to them. Society has said that she could not have achieved this, but she's done so. What can we learn from this as individuals? We can look at her as a source of motivation so that we can embody what she's achieved in her life onto our own. Coming from humble beginnings, she's managed to enact change not only as the first woman of color, but as the first female to be Secretary of State and a National Security Advisor, which is the fundamental definition of a role model, right? Something who we can all aspire to be or all can follow. On the political spectrum, not only did she successfully initiate diplomatic and bilateral talks under the Bush administration, but also work towards promoting gender equality in the military. We should ask ourselves, if someone who has played such an important role in our American political history is not deserving of the honor to speak at commencement, then who is? The second argument we'd like to talk about today is about discourse and political censorship. Rutgers prides itself on being a liberal institution and a historic college of ideas. But if we restrict Dr. Rice from speaking at commencement, we're not protecting free speech or academic freedom, and effectively just excluding those with whom we disagree. In addition, we're not only limiting the students to experience what she has to say, but also limiting the discourse that it would have created. Our prestigious university, the 8th oldest university in this nation, will not be remembered for all of our accomplishments, but be remembered as the institution which has rescinded the invitation to let a former Secretary of State, an African-American woman who grew up in a working-class family in the segregated South, to the highest echelon of world power and politics, speak to the graduates of the class of 2014. Simply because there's a group of individuals who oppose Dr. Rice, rescinding the invitation undermines the democratic ideals of this institution and this country at large. Rutgers, a public university whose mission is to produce students who perform public service in support of the needs of the citizens of the state and its local, county, and state governments, ought to be an apolitical institution. But the moment we take action is when we make an active political statement going against our mission statement. The third point that we'd like to talk about is the public perception of rescinding this invitation. Rescinding the invitation for our former Secretary of State will be viewed upon as an embarrassment to not only the university, but our state at large. New Jersey Republican State Assemblywoman Mary Pat Angelini called the Rutgers faculty decision, quote, appalling and an embarrassment to our state, and said that this is due to, quote, their hatred of an opposing ideology and President George W. Bush in particular. Rescinding an invitation, which often never happens at universities, is a very big deal.
And if we do something of that status to Dr. Condoleezza Rice, it's not only a statement against our university, but against her and her status as an individual. We say that that is not only a form of public shaming, but the utmost disrespect you could give any individuals at this stage. But you disagree.
You say that this is the hatred of an opposing ideology. Which ideology in America condones torture?
So, it was not exactly torture. We say that it was advanced interrogation techniques which were done in order to make sure for the safety and security of our country, to make sure for the safety and security of Americans that we live and talk with every day. That said, let's go to the arguments which they seem to preside. The first thing that they talk about is about the idea of torture and war crimes and violation of human rights. We tell you that Dr. Rice did not actually enact these policies, did not make these policies or pass them, right? She was a member of the Bush administration and simply did her job in carrying out what she was told to do. The idea about WMDs in Iraq and the information that they had at the time is something that they fundamentally believed was present. Information which they thought was actually legitimate. Now we come to find out it's not so, but it does not mean that they falsely sent forth information to the American public. They seem to say that Dr. Rice was also complicit in the role in the Iraq War, but we say that she was carrying her duty out in the Bush administration insofar as that she was listening to the policies and carrying them out, and not actually enacting policies and enacting the change that we saw. They seem to talk about more techniques such as waterboarding and how Dr. Rice being chosen by the Board of Governors was not done so in a proper manner. We have to look at, though, all political leaders and political figures in society today. Like, we have President Barack Obama. Obama has authorized drone strikes in sovereign nations and has played a role with the NSA in terms of surveillance administrations of individuals. Should we not invite President Obama to speak? Should we oppose his views in this matter? Should we lead protests in this sphere? We say that's not exactly true, right? We say that advanced interrogation techniques in protecting American liberties is very important in order to ensure our national security. In terms of how Dr. Rice was chosen by the Board of Governors, we have to look at what actually happened. In 2012, the faculty of the Rutgers administration was presented with a list of individuals who could speak at the commencement in 2014, but they never showed up to the Board of Governors in order to give their view on this commencement speaker. Therefore, having this opportunity but not enacting, not attaching, not coming to it is a big problem on their part. So what do we have to look at today? What does this debate come down to? We say that as an administrator, as a Secretary of State, we should look at whether Condoleezza Rice did what was in her power and did what was best for her country and the world at large. Today, we see that Saddam Hussein is out of power. We see that there's no more a tyranny in Iraq. We see that many individuals who would have otherwise died or faced troublesome situations are not in that position anymore. Insofar as we have more democratic institutions and a leader who provides motivation, we think that she is the right person to speak at commencement. We are happy to oppose.
Thank you. I thank the speaker for his remarks. I now call the honorable member of the government, Rachel Moon, to continue the case for the government side.
You're here.
Thanks everybody for gathering here today for what I think is a really important issue that all students should be concerned with. I'm going to first address the points that Daimler made, and then go on to reiterate what Arby said and also reinforce why Daimler's responses to them were adequate. So the first thing that Daimler comes up here and says is that, why Dr. Rice deserves this honor. He says the debate should be about her policies. It should not be about her policies, but rather her accomplishment. We should focus on the idea that this woman who came from nothing achieved so much within the administration and rose to such a high level position. So here's a distinction that I would like to clearly make during this round. We are not opposing her for her identity, for what she is, for who she is, and for what kinds of So we're not opposing her for her political affiliations or her viewpoints or anything like that. What we are opposing her is what she's chosen to do with all those hoops that she's leapt through to get to the point where she is. We say that we're opposing her actions, not her ideologies. This is why. So this is the distinction that we want to make. We're fine with inviting anybody, whether they be Republicans or Democrats or even Tea Partiers or anybody with a viewpoint that maybe differs from those that the majority of the students hold. But what we are not condoning, the reason why we're not condoning that Dr. Rice be our commencement speaker is the idea that she specifically put things into motion that have hurt so many people, that have taken away lives and misled the American public. She used her position in the public sphere in a dishonorable manner that does not actually warrant her becoming a commencement speaker, which is the position of high honor. Because what a commencement speaker means for a university is that that person embodies the ideals and the morality of what the university would like to see in its students, both within the school and outside when they graduate, which is why we select them to speak at graduation. I don't think that this woman embodies any of those ideals insofar as she misled the American public and led to such destruction of both the Middle Eastern people as well as the American people. The second point that Daimler talks about is the idea of discourse and censorship. He says Rutgers is a liberal institution, and we shouldn't be limiting the extent to which we can have a discourse about this. But here's the problem we have with the argument. We're fine with her inviting her to speak on any other platform that doesn't give her the highest distinction that a university could bestow upon somebody who did not actually attend the school. For example, we had people like Speaker Nancy Pelosi come this Monday. I would be fine if some other organization on campus invited Dr. Rice to come speak. But what we didn't do was bestow Speaker Pelosi with an honor or anything like that. I think this is a distinction because a lot of people say, well, so many people can be invited to the university to speak about a lot of things. We're fine with having Dr. Rice come on those grounds. We're not fine with having her be the ideal role model that we put forth for the graduating class of 2014. Daimler also talks about this idea that we'll be remembered as a college that denied a woman with such a great career to come and speak. Here's the thing that I want to make very, very clear. I am fine with being remembered as a college that denied this woman the right to speak in our commencement, which, by the way, there is no right to speak at a commencement speech. It is an invitation-only event. In that case, we're not barring anyone's freedom of speech. I don't have a right to go up there and speak as a commencement speaker, even though I do have freedom of speech. This is a very different thing. And we also would tell you that I'm fine being remembered at that college if it means that we stood up for something greater, which is that we don't condone people who use these kinds of human torturing or violate human rights and things like that. The third thing that Daimler talks about is the idea of public reception. He says this is an embarrassment to Rutgers University. We shouldn't be giving out invitations and rescinding it. So here's the thing. We say, one, it's more embarrassing to not stand up for what we recognize is right, which is that we should respect human rights and should not mislead the public through the powers of their career. And we also would say it's more embarrassing to not stand up for those kinds of things just because you think it'll optically look bad for your university. We also would tell you that we actually think that the public reception of this is going to be the impetus to make President Barty or whoever makes these kinds of decisions, the board of governors, make it so that this is a more inclusive process for the future, so that we don't have these kinds of things occurring, so that we know that the students are 100% behind the kinds of commencement speakers that we would like to have represented in our college. Because I think that's a really important thing. We think that one of the bigger issues with this debate is that it's not only about Dr. Rice herself, but also about the fact that it was chosen in a manner in which students and other faculty members that didn't really have a say. But I'm going to get to that or in addressing the points that Arby made, which I will do so now. So the first thing that Arby talked to you about was how this is Rutgers University is representative of students who are a collective of ideals. So this is what Daimler's response to this was. He says, well, Dr. Rice didn't actually make these policies that Arby spoke about, which he spoke about the over 100,000 deaths that occurred because of the wars and her denying or her perpetuating the myth that there are weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and her condoning the use of violent tactics. So we would say that she had the ability as a high-ranking cabinet member to influence these decisions, and she didn't actually do that. We would give you the example of Colin Powell during the Bush administration, who resigned because he didn't agree with the tactics that the Bush administration was using. We think that Dr. Rice always had a choice to not go along with these kinds of things, but chose to do so, and what's worse, lie about it. They give you the example of President Barack Obama and the drones, right? So one, we would say we're fine saying that we don't think that we should be inviting President Barack Obama to speak at our commencement because of his use of drones. But I also think that this example isn't analogous to the extent of Dr. Rice, because of the fact that we would tell you, remember what Arby told you, that Dr. Rice publicly went on air and made the conscious decision to keep misleading the American public about the presence of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. But President Obama did not do such a thing, and even if he had done it, we still don't think that we should be inviting him to come. We also told you the idea that Dr. Rice was also directly implicit, like things encouraging waterboarding and things like that. So that they also say she didn't make these policies, but even if she didn't enact them, even if she wasn't going to propose them or anything like that, she still went and did it, and like it was never stopped under her administration. We think everybody in that administration was probably, if they were complicit in that, we still wouldn't be asking them to speak. But you disagree.
Would you still be okay with inviting Obama to speak, even though he's publicly on file for saying that he was involved in the NSA administration?
So I think I just made it pretty clear that we wouldn't really support President Barack Obama coming either way because of all the human rights violations that were occurred, which is the use of drones. But the last thing that, but also what Arby told you that I want to remind you, was the idea that a commencement speaker should inspire the next line of graduates to do what she wants. So here's the thing, we grant degrees to graduates, to students at Rutgers who have put in the work of being here for 4 years or however many years from graduate year and law school because we want to reward the work that they have done in addition to acknowledging that those students, while accomplishing those, the work that they were supposed to be doing, also adhere to a certain code of ethics and the honor code within that the school endorses, because the school actually does have a pretty clear line of ethical code and morality that it wants students to follow. But a commencement speaker didn't actually go to our school, but the reason that we award those honorary degrees to those commencement speakers is because we want to say that even though they didn't accomplish the things that Rutgers endorses, through actually being in the Rutgers classrooms, they have accomplished that through their public service or whatever area that they do outside of Rutgers. But that's why they deserve to have an honorary degree awarded to them. I don't think that we want to, as a university, condone that what Dr. Rice has done for America was good. It's true that there are a lot of facets to her that are very inspiring, that she is an intellectual woman and no doubt someone to be commended. But we think that having her as a commencement speaker and bestowing an honorary degree to her is not just recognizing the parts of her that are honorable, that are commendable. What it means to actually bestow an honor upon her is that we condone everything that she has stood for throughout her time in the public sphere, and we don't think that we should be able to do that because of all the things that are being I told you. For all of these reasons, incredibly proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for her remarks and now call the honorable member of the opposition, Deepti Janardhan, to continue the case for the opposition side.
Thanks, everyone. Before I get into the points that everyone else has addressed, I want you all to participate in a little bit of a thought experiment. I want you to think of one U.S. president who has never brought this country into any kind of armed conflict, any kind of violence, anything like that. You can take a moment to do that. Can't think of any? That's because there isn't one, guys. I'd like to bring you to the harsh reality of the situation, that being the administrator of the most powerful country in the world comes with incredible burden on your shoulders. It's one that I certainly couldn't take, but it's one that Dr. Rice felt confident enough and felt strong enough to be able to take. And we think at that point, we should definitely respect that. But we think that this by itself, merely the fact that she has brought our country into armed conflict, is not by itself a reason not to bring her on as a commencement speaker. We think that by doing so, we would essentially be barring any American politician to bring them on as a speaker, because we think that all of them have at some point condoned violence in some sort of fashion. But I also think, though, that we don't know all of the information that led them to the decision to go into the Iraq War. We may make fun of the idea of weapons of mass destruction now, but the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, there are lots of confidential files that are still locked up, that we still don't know what the real situation was, things that we probably won't find out for decades and decades to come. So we think at that point that is not the action by which we should judge Dr. Rice, but rather the other personal accomplishments that she's achieved throughout her lifetime. Look, we think that someone's personal beliefs are fundamentally distinct from their role as a politician, because we think that when you're doing things for your country, you act in a certain way, even you may act in a certain way that people disagree with, but at the end of the day, the reason that you've given up your whole life to public service is because you want to protect the American people. And we think that Dr. Rice was acting in that kind of capacity. We don't think that it's fair on our part to actually judge her for that. So we think at the end of the day, what we should do is choose a commencement speaker based on her accomplishments. Daimler named a long list of academic accomplishments that Dr. Rice has achieved that went largely ignored by side government. We think that at the point where this is an academic institution, we honor all sorts of views, we honor all sorts of beliefs, and just free discourse for its own sake, that to deny Dr. Rice her ability to speak is to deny basically the ideas of millions of Americans who may have agreed with her views. We don't think that's something that a liberal institution should be doing. Sure.
If I am a doctor and save 10 lives and then murder another individual, should a court of law then declare me innocent based on my previous attributes?
So here's the distinction here, Sean. In doing this action, she was doing her job. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine how horrible it would have been if 9/11 had happened again, if another terrorist attack had come into our country, if someone else had come in and killed 2,000 American citizens. You know who would be blamed in that situation? Condoleezza Rice, ladies and gentlemen. And we think at the point where that kind of decision is laying on one person's shoulders, we think that using the limited information that they have at the time, because remember, we didn't know very much about terrorism in 2003 when we went into Iraq. We think at that point, her actions were justified, and that she did do something in the legitimate interest of furthering the American people's security. So. But I also think, though, Sean, that if you disagree with her views, we think there are ways to do that. Look, I'm not up here campaigning for Condoleezza Rice in the next election, right? I'm not up here telling you that you have to vote for her to be your president, to keep on doing the things that she has done in the past if you disagree with her. All I'm saying is, at the point where we've invited her, at the point where we've said that at the point where we've accepted that she was a female in a very high position of our American government, that she should get the chance to say what she has to say, right? I don't think that she's going to go up here and try and condone all of the torture tactics that were used during the Iraq War, which may or may not have been to her knowledge, right? But we think that what she's actually going to do is try and serve as an inspiration to the thousands of minority students, the thousands of females who go to our school, inspire them to be in a very similar position of leadership. And we think that that's something that we're proud to defend on our side of the house. So they go on to say that they're not opposing her for her status, that it doesn't matter whether she's a Democrat or Republican. I want you to value this, ladies and gentlemen, because the belief among Republicans at the time was that the Iraq War was something that's correct to do, right? Just because she went through with that belief, mistaken though it may have been, we think at the point where she thought that this was the correct action to take to ensure her safety, they are necessarily discriminating against her for her beliefs, for the belief that the American security is something that should be valued and is so high that they are willing to go to war with another country in order to protect it. That's the thing that they ignore on their side. All they say is, well, we wouldn't have discriminated on her beliefs, but this is actually what we're doing. But the second thing we talk about is free speech and discourse. And I think that this looks incredibly hypocritical when Rutgers claims to be this bastion of free speech and free liberal thinking, and then the person that we bar, the person that we literally turn away from this podium, is someone who happens to be a conservative Republican. We think that that sends an incredibly bad message. We think that that has a major chilling effect on speech at this university for people who may disagree with what the majority of students and what the majority of faculty think. We think that's something that we would never ever want in this university. They go on to say that, well, of course we should rescind the invitation because this was an immoral action that we took, and at that point, it's not morally acceptable to do this. And then Rachel goes on to say that students need to agree on a commencement speaker before this happens. So, like I told you, ladies and gentlemen, any political figure will inspire a certain amount of controversy in its student body. I don't think there has ever been any political leader that 100% of people agree with. I don't think there's any person that 100% of people agree with, right? I don't think that that by itself is a reason to deny for, if we go with their plan, is the school that chose to invite Snooki, but chose to send away Condoleezza Rice, and we think that that's necessarily the message that we're sending on their side of the house. So, then in their case, they talk about they give like you this laundry list of things that happened during wartime. Guys, I hate to break it to you, but when you engage in this thing called war, when you engage in any kind of violence, we think that these are like the inevitable byproducts of this. And if you bought anything that I said so far, if you bought that being an American politician means that you need to condone violence in some way, we think that what Condoleezza Rice, what she did was not necessarily out of line. But what I also told you is that you can never have full information on this subject, right? Like, it's probably going to be a very, very long time before we know what details were revealed to Dr. Rice that actually led her to making this decision. We think the jury's still out. Lincoln, too, was criticized for suspending habeas corpus, for throwing people in jail without a trial, but people don't defame him today. People don't speak out against him today. They consider him one of the greatest American presidents of that time, and we think at that point it's not fair for us to judge her on this, but instead to judge her on everything else that she's accomplished, on the fact that being a black woman in the South, she was able to ascend to one of the highest positions in this country. We think we get that on our side. Look, ladies and gentlemen, you are never going to condone anything about a person, but that's because people aren't perfect. We accept that reality on our side of the house. We accept that she's human. We accept that she's made mistakes. We're the more realistic side. We are so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for her remarks, and would now like to call the Honorable Opposition Whip, Alex Jubb, to close the case for the opposition. Here.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out here. It's a huge honor to be debating in front of you all on such an important topic. I'm going to have two questions to really clear up, I think, what are the main issues in this round. The first, what should a commencement speaker be? Side government and side opposition both agree. A commencement speaker should be somebody who inspires students, who is a leader within our society, who has done great accomplishments. And what Deepta and Daimler have told you is that Condoleezza Rice absolutely does fit this position, that she was a provost at Stanford, that she holds many honorary degrees, that she, as an African-American woman, broke down barriers for us all by rising to one of the most important political posts within our nation. I think that at a school especially as diverse as this one, it is absolutely vital to recognize these accomplishments. What side government instead says is that because you do not necessarily agree with her political views, that you absolutely have to rescind this offer. But what we stand for on side opposition is this idea that there is always going to be political discourse and political dissent, and we embrace that discourse and dissent. That there has never been a politician, and that there will never be anybody of any importance who you agree with wholeheartedly. And that is your right, and that is a privilege that you should absolutely take. And I think the fact that faculty and students are taking that privilege is absolutely correct. But the fact that you disagree with a politician doesn't make them a bad politician, especially when we do not know the information that Dr. Rice had at the time, that we will not know for decades the real circumstances that went into what happened in the last decade. We think that it is absolutely too soon to judge this person, especially a person who was appointed by a democratically elected government that millions of Americans supported in this way. So I think that at that point, you have to really look to her accomplishments and say that she was an incredibly important political figure, and that whether or not you think she made some bad decisions, you don't know what information she was acting on, and she certainly acted in what she thought was going to be best for protecting the American people. And I think that that should be inspirational, coming from somebody who started at such a low position and was able to rise and break down so many barriers. But the second question I want to ask you is, why is discourse so vital? Because side government says it's okay to deny her from this privilege of speaking at commencement, despite the fact you've already invited her. Because this is a special day. It's a day to actually celebrate our graduates. And we agree. We think that we should be celebrating our graduates. But by taking away this post when she's already been invited, what you say is that if we as Rutgers University, or if only a few people at Rutgers University disagree with you, you will not be allowed to speak here. And I think that what this says, especially when you are denying this to a conservative politician, is that no other conservative politicians are going to be willing to speak on campus. And I think that you are coming out against an entire political movement that millions of Americans and thousands of people within this university agree with. And I think that you exclude them not speak at our commencement. We will be remembered for disrespecting such an important individual within our society. And I think this is incredibly vital, because you are going to be taking away this honor. But I think that this discourse is very important. But I don't think that discourse should be to the act of actually hurting another individual. And I think if we let the fact that there is some disagreement on the issue of Condoleezza Rice actually override the idea of discourse and democracy at a university, then we are doing ourselves a great disservice. But I want to close on this idea of us being a public university, because I think this is really critical. When you take this action, when you actually rescind this offer to Dr. Rice, what you are doing is taking a political stand, and it will be seen as a political stance and discussed as a political stance across the nation. And this is incredibly damaging, because what we've told you from the beginning is that a public university taking a political stance like this is simply unjust and is going to exclude individuals from the political process and from the democratic debate. We can never have success in this nation unless we have room for discourse, and we should not deny Dr. Rice's views or her accomplishments by denying this discourse. That is why we are incredibly proud to oppose this resolution. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for her summation, and finally call the Honorable Government Whip, Sean Leonard, to close the round and the government case.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me make it clear what this debate is not about. This debate is not about what we know Condoleezza said, because, think about it. Or, this debate is not about what we think Condoleezza knew in the beginning, because we know what she said and we know what information she was acting on. We know that in early 2000, she came on national television and told all of us that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We now know today that that information was incorrect. If we have limited information, if we don't know what Condoleezza was thinking at this point, we at least know this one piece of information and ought act on it. But even more so, we think it's problematic to even take the stance that we should allow politicians to do things that kill thousands of American lives without us knowing anything about the conflict to begin with. We think that perpetuating this society, wherein politicians can get away with saying, we can't give you this information, despite it leading to your friends, your brothers, sometimes your own family dying in war, that is something we ought to oppose, and that Condoleezza Rice is the example of it existing in society. But I want to talk firstly about society specifically. And I want to say that all of us are immensely powerful beyond our own comprehension for one specific reason. We all embody individual ideals in society, things that we hold dear, things that we ought support in a democratic climate. One of these things is the prevention of lies of our own government, because we need to protect our democracy because if we don't protect that democracy, then people can get away with abusing it. This is a circumstance of someone abusing democracy, taking a democratically elected position and not spreading actual information around, but instead giving lies. This is the exact abuse of democracy we need to stand for in society, because by not standing against it, we are thus complacent and endorsing it. When we don't take action, we always endorse that action. But more importantly under this, Rutgers University is endorsing this action because we are paying this individual to come speak at commencement. We are giving them money that is coming out of our student fund that could go towards services towards us to someone who is a war criminal. But even more importantly, we're giving them a doctorate of law, somebody who is breaking that law. We think this is an incredibly problematic situation and ought not be one that we endorse. But second, I want to talk about discourse specifically, because I think this is the most misrepresented point. They say discourse is good. We generally agree, and we think that's happening right now, for example, even if we rescind this invitation. But secondly, we think that discourse is only valuable insofar as it can actually change things. It doesn't matter if I come up here and say things that don't change society, that have no influence on whether or not this invitation is being sent out. But yet, the decision apparently has already been made. That means that this discourse around these issues, even if we were to universally say we don't want Condoleezza to come, doesn't actually matter from their side. Because if Archie himself says there is no way that we can rescind this invitation, and all of us cry out against it, that discourse is thus invaluable. Discourse is only valuable insofar as it can actually change things. This is a proper democratic ideal and a decision we ought to oppose with our own democracy. The third and final thing that I want to talk about, the third question I want to ask, is what about Condoleezza Rice? Because they try and bring up this point. They try and say to you that Condoleezza Rice is a fantastic woman, that she is someone whose individual ideals should stand aside her political ideals, and that Rutgers University should not take a political stand. With that, I ask you, in which political ideology is lying okay? Lying to the people who voted for you, when we can individually prove that they were lies. But more importantly, in which society is torture okay? In which circumstance is it allowed? The only thing they say to this is, Republicans believed it at the time. Perhaps Republicans believed it because of the very lie that was given to support that political ideology, because of the narrative that was changed to create support for this plan. It's almost like democracy, in order to be meaningful, must also be informed. That is the vital stance that we take on our side. But also, to quote Stannis Baratheon, I want to say that the good does not wash out the bad, nor the bad the good. It doesn't matter my personal attributes. I might be the President of the United States, but if I shoot my friend, if I shoot my fellow citizen, I am a murderer first. That is what creates societies of law. Because just because if I do one thing, just because I come out of Alabama, just because I go through social change, does not absolve me against crimes against humanity specifically, and that is exactly what we are condoning by not taking stances against countries. Today, you have this chance to stand for something, and understand that if we don't stand for something, we then fall for anything. So proud to propose.
At this time, we have about 10 minutes for questions. If people want to line up at the center microphone and ask a brief question of anyone who conducted the debate about the topic of the debate, that is more than welcome.
Anyone else want to ask a question, please line up here. As you said, 10 minutes, so make a question quickly.
All right, go ahead.
Hi. It's not working. There we go. All right. A very simple question for side government. What politician would you condone inviting for a commencement speech?
We wouldn't. We would rather Rutgers be apolitical.
Okay, next question.
All right. Great job on both sides. Very interesting debate. This is for side government. I would just like to get you guys' opinions on morality involved in this case, because I think those on the Republican side, which I happen to be on, do not see it as an uncomplicated issue. They see claims and counterclaims of human rights being violated and atrocities occurring specifically in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, who is most humanitarian rights organizations agree killed upwards of 1 million people in the entirety of his tenure. So I would just like to get your opinion on the moral calculus of this. Do you just reject ends versus means kind of thinking on it? Would you say that, while this is bad, it is worse to intervene in this sovereign country? Get your side.
So I think it's totally fine if the American people say, because Saddam Hussein had this genocide, then we intervene. But I think lying and getting a different reason for war is the problem with the stance. If everyone in America voted to say we should intervene in Iraq because of these injustices, that's totally fine. But undermining democratic will with information is just an affront to democracy.
All right, next question.
This is for the opposition. You argued that Condoleezza, Condoleezza Rice and would infringe on her free speech, but the decision to make her commencement speaker was solely done by the Board of Governors without consultation with the Faculty Council. So isn't that denying their free speech in the process of appointing a commencement speaker and honoring a law degree and $35,000?
Hi. So first of all, it's totally unclear whether like the Board of Governors and how many people actually knew about Condoleezza Rice. Like I've read different reports literally each hour I'm reading one that they knew and another one saying that they don't know. So again, that's unclear. But I do somewhat stand by what I said in my speech and what they supported, which is that anyone who you bring to Rutgers, any commencement speaker, any person is going to be a cause for controversy. Like if they've actually accomplished anything in their life, if they've really done anything of note, I don't think that there are 100% of people who are going to agree with them. But we think that by extending this invitation and then saying, well, no, people happen to disagree with it. We think that what that does is send the message that if you are a conservative Republican, if you are someone who the majority of students disagree with, whose views are already represented, by the way, then you're not worthy of being our commencement speaker. And I don't think that's a good message that we want.
Yeah, but our schools are made of our students, so that doesn't really make any sense. I'm sorry. My question wasn't for you, sorry. I have a question for the gentleman in the suit. You said you were defending Condoleezza Rice by saying that she used, or she complied in the use of advanced interrogation techniques from PS, that you called it. Was there a single shred of evidence that you so have claimed to save American lives or thousands of American lives from such advanced interrogation techniques? Was there a shred of evidence ever produced at the committee hearings or ever presented? If you could clarify that.
Sorry. Let's just please keep all questions polite. Thank you. Here. Thank you for that question. So we're going to say that insofar as we've elected her to be one of the representing members of this country, and insofar as she's the Secretary of State, you can say that she acted upon the best knowledge that she had at the moment, insofar as like we still have not solely clear evidence of what happened with documents she was aware of and what she had available to her. So we were perfectly fine with saying that she took the action which best supported American ideas and best supported this country.
Next question. Thank you both sides for interesting arguments. I actually have a question side opposition about an interesting argument that was made. The argument was made that commencement speaker invited Condoleezza Rice. Her personal morals and her personal honor sort of divorced from her reality and her occupation. I would ask, is it because she's a politician that that she's afforded this, very interesting sort of honor, that her personal character is divorced from the clearly egregious things that she engaged in? This is someone who we as a university are saying that our graduates, our commencement attendees should be emulating. She has blood dripping from her hands. If you're to follow in her footsteps, why should we be forced to tread on that very floor?
So I think what the on-side position are supporting is not necessarily that you can't evaluate her political actions at all, but that any political person of any power, or really any commencement speaker who you've ever heard of, is going to have things that you disagree with, and that is not a reason in and of itself to invalidate that. But also that we will never know the counterfactual. We will never know what would have happened if somebody else was in Dr. Rice's position, especially when this was a democratically elected American president who appointed her, and we don't know what information she was acting on at the time. We won't know for decades what was actually happening, what she knew at the time versus what other people knew at the time, and what she was told. And I think it is also very unlikely in this scenario that she would have had a large piece of sway with an entire administration that had a particular agenda. So I think that what we're saying is not that you can't evaluate their politics at all, but that you are always going to disagree with something that somebody did for you. And that doesn't invalidate the fact that they are important.
Is Toni Morrison someone who a lot of people would disagree with?
I think that.
I mean, you said that problems can be brought up against anyone. Is Toni Morrison someone who would cause controversy?
So I think that there are people who would disagree with the way that Toni Morrison writes her graphic descriptions of things. And again, that's a good point in and of itself. Like, do we only ever want to invite artists, authors, people who are definitely worthy of recognition in a public forum and in a public setting? But we think that politicians too have something valuable to offer, insofar as they have chosen to publicly serve, insofar as the responsibility of whatever happens in the United States fell on Condoleezza Rice's shoulders. We think that she occupies a unique space in the public sphere, and that it's perfectly respectable to invite her in the situation.
Like 2 or 3 more questions, probably. Yeah.
So there's a lot of game in the room. First of all, congratulations to all the debaters. You guys are really good. Really dope stuff. So my question is for side opposition. So you make a really good point about how Condoleezza Rice broke through a lot of barriers and broke through a lot of oppression. But I ask, are those standards, do they really matter at the point that breaking those barriers of oppression were then used to incur oppression, not just against people in Iraq, but also against the American population through the line?
I think that when we're talking about like a specific leader that evaluating that she did actually overcome a lot of things and that she did break through barriers for all women in these kind of positions. And I think that when you're talking, there is a lot of debate today about what happened in 2003 and leading up to those events. Lots of people, even in this room, disagree with that. And I think that it's totally legitimate to disagree with what happened. You have a certain political view about what happened. But that doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong or that Dr. Rice herself is culpable for the entire act of administration that America staunchly supported at the time and elected into power. So I don't think it's fair to say that this was oppression necessarily. And I think that the fact that there is lots of political discourse in this and at this university about that means that it is certainly still moving forward and probably one that can never be able to.
Thanks.
All right, 2 or 3 more.
Hi, this is the side opposition. I want you to clarify the point when you said that Dr. Rice was acting based on the information that she had and that we don't know how much information they had. But I have a report from 2001 by the UN stating that to date found no evidence or plausible indication of the revival of a nuclear weapons program in Iraq. And this is just one of a myriad of reports that had said that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction and the U.S. was acting in a very subjective manner. Can you please clarify when you say that Dr. Rice does not have the evidence to say that she was calling U.S. population in Iraq?
There are 2 important words at the beginning of that report in that debate. Like, there are a lot of things that are still classified, like I said, a lot of details that can never come out. I also think that at the time, like, they had inside sources, and the administration had, like, certain spies or certain reports of weapons of mass destruction. So we think that Condoleezza Rice.
Sorry. After 1992, the UN had launched investigations every single year to check different sites to see if there were weapons of mass destruction. So this was taken after 10 years of investigation.
Right. So.
What is trying to say that information may be correct, and we have better knowledge now and better hindsight now looking at the issue, but that it is very possible that Dr. Rice, acting as Secretary of State, was told information and closed meetings that we didn't have to live with, that the United States itself had investigations within Iraq, had sources within Iraq that said that there were weapons of mass destruction. And I would challenge anybody in this room that acting as Secretary of State to defend this country to go against an entire administration and say, I disagree with this, I disagree with sources that say this is going to risk American laws. And I think that it's a hard decision and one that we should absolutely disagree with and talk about. But that doesn't necessarily make her responsible for this, especially not as part of an entire democracy.
All right, last question. Ideally, a question for the government. If anyone has one.
Hello. This is for Gov. Just out of curiosity. So, given that if we do resend this invitation, who do you plan to invite afterwards? Or, for example, next year, who is really prominent and really respected that, a person a lot of students want to go and listen to, who will now also accept your invitation?
We're going to take turns with this because we have different opinions. I'd invite Colin Powell because it's like a really stark contrast of like standing up against the Bush administration and just saying, I'm not going to deal with this scenario. I don't want to be like a part of like the Iraqi war.
I don't have a specific person in mind, but I highly doubt that there aren't any more accomplished people in the world that haven't committed crimes against humanity. And also, I would be fine with not having if it doesn't
sending on somebody who is basically a war criminal and just having like, I don't know, like a funding for a student situation or something to that extent.
It wasn't obvious from like probably to
All right, thank you all for your questions. I know lots of you have many more questions. We can just take a moment to thank the 6 debaters. And we want to thank RUSA again for inviting us here. And remind everyone that the debaters in this round do not necessarily represent their own personal viewpoints, so please don't hold them to that. So as I understand it now, there's going to be a brief break, and then RUSA is going to finalize their debate on this topic and have a vote. So please feel free to stick around for that.
Secretary.